بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, we're continuing with لمحات من تاريخ السنة وعلوم الحديث of Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda, glimpses from the history of Sunnah and the sciences of Hadith. And we were previously discussing asbab al-wad'i, the reasons and the causes of why people used to fabricate Hadith. And the next chapter is, I guess, one of the seventh and the last of the asbab. And just to go over, we can read through them, counting them off. So this is basically the last one. He commences with ad-dawafi' as-siyasiyya. The first one is political reasons. When there was political issues that came about in the beginning, trials and tribulations that took place from the time of the assassination of Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan, we know that there was a lot of disagreements and a lot of conflict regarding who's going to be Khalifa and who is more rightful and who's not rightful. So each group, they had their own political motives and they turned to fabrication of ahadith in order to give themselves that leverage and that, you can say, legitimacy through fabricating that this hadith shows the virtue of Ali, this hadith shows the virtue of Muawiyah, right? This hadith shows the virtue of Abu Bakr, and so on and so forth. And you don't need to fabricate hadith about that, but they did that in order to show, you can say, the sanctity, that see, it's your religious obligation to follow so-and-so. It's your religious obligation to honor so-and-so. And if you do it, Allah will reward you. So if, through regular argument or regular political debate, people are not going to accept it, so people will accept it when it's some religious justification. Similarly, like people today consider Trump, like a group of the evangelicals consider him to be like, the Messiah or something like that. Like, he's God sent, and they're praying for him in their churches, and they've given him like some symbolic religious status. So they fabricated hadith so they can strengthen their political groups. So that was the first, right, sabab, why people commenced with fabrications. Number two, al-adawatu lil-islami dinan wa dawlatan. It was enmity towards Islam, enmity to the religion of Islam and enmity to the Islamic State, right? We're not talking about this Islamic State, ISIS. Right? This is a creation of the West. You understand what I'm saying? We're talking about the Islamic State as the Islamic governance, right? So people, when Islam spread, they didn't like it that, the Persian Empire is now being ruled by Arabs. They didn't like it that the Roman Empire is now controlled by these Arabs, these Muslims. They didn't like it. They couldn't fight them on the battlefield. So they came into it in different ways, fabricating hadith to show and ridicule Islam and make Islam look bad, as we see now in Islamophobia through all different social media and all the other outlets where they giving a bad name to Islam through this method. So that was the second cause, okay, for those who are taking notes. The third cause is al-asabiyatu lil-jinsi wal-qabilati wal-lughati wal-baladi wal-imam. It was extremism and fanaticism of, your group. Like people had, and this is the, subhanAllah, the beauty of Islam, was that wherever it spread, the message of Islam was one. That we are all one people under the banner of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. So this was something that was a unifying factor. Arabic was the language. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah was your passport, basically. But this is what the enemy hated most. So what they did, they fabricated hadiths for racism. They fabricated hadith showing the superiority of an ethnicity. They fabricated hadith showing the superiority of a language. They fabricated a hadith showing the superiority of a qawm or a tribe or a qabila. And by doing that, what did they do? They tried to break down the pillar of strength of Islam, which was the ukhuwatul Islam, the brotherhood of Islam. إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةً. Wallahi, there's nothing stronger than that. If you are La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, if you believe in that, it doesn't matter which qabila you're from. It doesn't matter what skin color you are. It doesn't matter what ethnicity you come from. We're all one people. This is the beauty of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. So it was only fabricated hadiths that could destroy that. Because the teaching of Islam and the Quran is opposite of that. The teachings of Islam and Quran is that we're all one people. Not even Muslim, even non-Muslim, they are the creation of Allah. There's hadith that we have to, treat everybody with kindness. There's hadith that show that we have to be a mercy for all people. Al-Muslimu man salim an-nas, man aminahu an-nas. A Muslim is the one who other people are safe from his abuse. This goes for everybody. So the only thing that could destroy that is now these fake narrations. Right? That Farsi, when Allah is happy, then He reveals revelation in the Farsi language. And when Allah is angry, He reveals revelation in Arabic language. And, foolish things like this, which the public and the awam and nas fall for. So that was number 3. Right? Number 4 is stories and fables, so that, the storytellers, they can get, right, more popularity. So they can get more likes and that they can get more followers and subscribers. Now we have YouTube, right? It's called clickbait, right? It's just clickbait. They put something. So similarly, people used to fabricate hadiths so they could get more people to listen to them. They could get more popularity and so on. So that was the 4th cause, right? The 5th cause is khilafatul madhabiyya wal kalamiyya. Various different when there was the different sects of Islam, so one sect would, show or fabricate hadith, like the Shia and the Sunni and the Mu'tazili and the Qadari and the Jabari and all these other sects that came about, different groups that came about. Each deviant sect would at times fabricate certain hadith for their own favor, to show their superiority. Or madhab. As we mentioned, the terrible hadith that somebody had quoted, where they said, there's a person, his name was Muhammad ibn Idris, he is worse than Iblis. Yani Imam Shafi'i. Na'udhu billah. Fake. They're making this up so they can show the superiority of a madhab and put down the other madhab, whereas both of these imams are beloved to us. Right. The Imams, Imam Abu Hanifa, Shafi'i, Malik, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, they're like Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali. Do we have any hatred for any of them? Hasha wa kalla. Ever, never. Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, all of them are beloved to us. Somebody might say, how we have these 4 madhabs? How are all of them beloved to us? No. Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, Ahmad ibn Hanbal are beloved to us just like the 4 Khalifas. We have 4 Khalifas, right? We accept them. We say all of them are beloved to us. Same with the 4 madahib. There's no difference. So people came, ignorant people, and they try to make this type of, sectarianism and, divide and conquer type of thing, where they now fabricate hadiths in hatred of the other madhab. The 6th cause, al-ihtisabu fil wad'i lit-targhib wat-tarhib. Certain people would do it out of hoping for its reward. Remember, we're talking about the ignorant people who fabricate hadiths thinking that they're doing a good act, spreading the deen. I'm giving da'wah. I'm making up this fake hadith so people can pray. I'm making up this fake hadith so people can recite Quran. I'm making up this fake hadith so people can do this, that, and the other. So people can become more aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, have taqwa. Right? In other words, all of these are the different asbab, the different causes, reasons why people are fabricating a hadith. Each one of them is absolutely incorrect to do. right? And then the next one, this one that we've reached now, the seventh and the last of them, right? So this is talking about actually in history how these fabricated ahadith came about. The seventh one is التقرب من الحكام والتوصل إلى الأغراض الدنيوية, to get closer to the governors and rulers and people of authority and position, right? To get close to the people of authority, to the people of position, to the people of status, so that when you fabricate a hadith for him, he will give you money and he takes care of you. So this was very known, that the shu'ara, the poets, especially Arab poets, they had poetry that they used to say in front of the Khalifa or in front of the governor, and that would, make them so happy when they would hear that, they would read it in their praise. That then after that, then the Khalifa would give him a large amount of money. He said, okay, give him his weight in gold when he would say that poetry. So then, you got business every day. If it's like that, I'll be writing poetry every day, So this is one of the reasons. There's a very famous Abu Firas. ليتك تحلو والحياة مريرة وليتك ترضى والأنام غضاب وليت الذي بيني وبينك عامر وبيني وبين العالمين خراب إذا صح منك الود فالمال هين وكل الذي فوق التراب تراب. Very famous poem. ليتك تحلو والحياة مريرة. Oh, if only you're sweet, even though my days are bitter. وَلَيْتَكَ تَرْضَى وَالْأَنَامُ غِضَابُ. And I wish that you are pleased with me, even if the whole world is angry with me, it doesn't matter. وَلَيْتَ الَّذِي بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكَ عَامِرٌ وَبَيْنِي وَبَيْنَ الْعَالَمِينَ خَرَابُ. And I wish that between me and you there's a connection, even though my connection with everybody else is kharab and messed up. And then it says, إِذَا صَحَّ مِنْكَ الْوُدُّ فَالْمَالُ هَيِّنٌ. When my love with you is strong, then money doesn't mean anything for you, O my Khalifa. If my connection with you is strong, then money is nothing for you. That's how generous you are. وَكُلُّ الَّذِي فَوْقَ التُّرَابِ تُرَابُ. And everything on top of this earth is earth. Everything is khak. For you, everything, it doesn't matter. It's cheap for you. You can spend anything upon me. I mean, these were the poetry of madh that they used to read for the Khalifas. Poetry was there, but hadith, people used to fabricate hadith as well. So poetry was always known. That every darbar, every mala, it had a poet, and they would used to sing these type of poetry honoring him, right? That you are like the sun, and you are like the moon, and you are like this and that. Beautiful poetry, amazing. But that is fine. But this was something that on another level, they would actually fabricate hadith on the name of the Prophet ﷺ. So he says, يوجد في كل عصر ومصر أناس فاقدوا الذمة في دينهم رقة وضعف يحبون دنياهم ويؤثرونها على دينهم. There was always people in every day and age, and every time and in every place, people that they had weakness in their deen, and they loved the dunya, and they would prefer the dunya over their deen, and they would do anything to make a buck, right? And they found their way of how they're going to make money, the closeness to the people of governance. And we see this even today, right? They know if I connect myself to this politician, if I connect myself to this powerful individual, this politician, this governor, this mayor, this sharwali, or whatever that guy might be, I connect myself to him, then this is an easy way of making money. But by doing that, you got to become a sellout. You have to sell your deen, you have to sell your iman, right? You have to sell your faith, you got to sell your ideals and your morals and your ethics and everything that you believe in. And there's people that are ready to do that, and the meaning of this is a test. It exists now, and it will always exist. So some of them, فيتملقونهم بالباطل ويقدمون لهم بحسب ذمتهم من النصوص الشرعية ما يؤيدهم فيما هم عليه من ظلم أو لهو أو بطالة أو فساد. So what they would do is they would make up hadiths for them that would justify the actions of that Khalifa. So, if anybody doesn't know, does anybody know how Imam Abu Hanifa passed away? Imam Abu Hanifa passed away in prison. He was poisoned by the Khalifa of the time. Because the Khalifa said, I want you to be my chief justice, judge. Why did he want him to be the judge? Because when you're the judge and you're under the Khalifa, then you have to give fatwas that will appease, the fatwas that will be in accordance with the wish and the desire of that zalim. And a lot of the things that in that time took place, what fatwa would it be? Zameen mardum ghasb mein kadan. That was what it was. They used to usurp the property of people. Izyat bud. They used to make ghasab of the aradi, lands of people, like what's going on in Palestine right now. Right? Those people that are the judges that are in Israeli justice, how are they giving those lands to people? They just write a document and they said, yeah, it belongs to you. Why? Because order of Netanyahu or some other mal'oon, Iblis, right? It just gives them that you have to do this. So that justice, that judge, he just writes a verdict. He writes they'll write something and says, okay, this now is your property. What? What are you talking about? He comes with a bulldozer and this was taking place a lot. Imam Abu Hanifa didn't want any part in that. He said, I know you're going to make me do that. So then one time, Imam Abu Hanifa was brought into court. He says every day he would be brought and summoned in the presence of the governor of Iraq. I don't know who it was at that time. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, was it Al-Mansur? Allahu Alam. One of the Abbasis. So he was brought and summoned in front of the governor or the sultan or whoever. So he said, how come you're not accepting this? You're going to remain in prison until you accept what I'm telling you. So Imam Hanifa said, no, I'm not qualified. I'm not qualified for the position. He's the Imam of the time. He said, you're lying. He said, see, how can a liar be a judge? You're saying it yourself. You said I'm a liar, and a liar cannot be a judge. So Imam Hanifa was very sharp. He would say these type of things. And that is why then he went to prison, and then when the Sultan knew that he's not going to listen, he poisoned him. And that is how Imam Hanifa rahimahullah passed away. So there was this is the condition of what was going on. Like if you work for the government and if you work for the Khalifa, I mean, you get taken care of. And we're going to see some examples of how people used to get taken care of. So it mentions here, Shaykh Abdul Fattah says, وَهَذَا الصِّنْفِ مِنَ الْمُنْتَسِبِينَ إِلَى الْعِلْمِ مَرَضٌ وَخِيمٌ فِي جِسْمِ الْأُمَّةِ. He says, these group of fake ulama, this group of fake scholars, right? People who are connected or have some attribution to scholarship, which they're not really real scholars. They're liars. They are a disease in this ummah. They are a disease. وَبَلَاءٌ عَظِيمٌ فِي حَيَاتِهَا. And they are tribulation upon this ummah. وَقَلَّ أَن تَنْجُوَ مِنْهُ أُمَّةٌ أَوْ تَسْلَمَ مِنْهُ جَمَاعَةٌ. But very few people are saved from this. Very, very few people and very few communities are safe from having these type of, right, people that are, they'll give you whatever you want to hear if you give them money. قال الحافظ السيوطي في تدريب الراوي أسند الحاكم عن أبي عبيد الله وزير المهدي قال المهدي ألا ترى من يقول لي مقاتل بن سليمان الخراساني البلخي صاحب التفسير قال إن شئت وضعت لك أحاديث في العباس قلت لا حاجة لي فيها. Khalifa, so the wazir of Mahdi, Mahdi was one of the khulafa, Abbasi khulafa. So Hakim, Ubaidullah, who was the advisor of Mahdi, he said that Mahdi said to me, do you not see what Muqatil ibn Sulaiman? Muqatil ibn Sulaiman was a rawi. He was a rawi of hadith. He has a lot of hadith regarding tafsir. So they know that this person, he's problematic. They don't accept tafsir from him. So he's very famous, Muqatil ibn Sulaiman. And then there's Muqatil ibn Hayyan. There's two Muqatils. Muqatil ibn Sulaiman, who is not acceptable, and then Muqatil ibn Hayyan, who is acceptable. So he said, don't you see what Muqatil is telling me? Mahdi says to his wazir, he says, In shi'ta wada'tu laka ahadith fil Abbas. He said, if you like, oh Khalifa, I can make up hadith for the virtue of Abbas. I'll make up hadith for you that talks about the virtue and the goodness of Abbas, because they're the Abbasi Khalifas, right? So when you give hadith, oh, the Prophet ﷺ said that this is the speciality of Abbas. So now that proves that now for you to stay obedient to the Abbasi Khilafat, it means that, you are, fulfilling a religious obligation. So Khalifa al-Mahdi was a pious person. He was a pious person. He was a scholar. So he said to him, La hajata li fiha. I don't have any need for your making up hadiths for me. There's another interesting point. They said that Khalifa Mahdi al-Abbasi, he liked kaftarbazi, playing with doves. Kaftarbaz bud. He liked to play with doves. And kana amamahu hamam yal'abu biha. He was playing with these pigeons. فقيل لغياث حدث أمير المؤمنين. So there was a person who was a narrator, Ghiyath ibn Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. Ghiyath ibn Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. He was one of the fabricators. So he was sitting there, he said, say a hadith for Amir al-Mu'mineen. So, yo ushar budan. They were very smart. He see that he's playing with pigeons and doves. So that person who's supposedly a muhaddith, he's a fabricator. Tayar da munjabud, he's waiting. So then he made up a hadith. The hadith goes like this. From Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu, there is no competition except in running and in spear throwing and in horse riding. I think there's one hadith that's similar to this, that if there's competition in anything, yani if you want to race, then there's racing in running on foot and spear throwing and horse riding. This is what you do competition, because it strengthens and trains you for jihad, fi sabilillah, right? So then he added, and also in the pigeons. Right? And لا سبق إلا في خف أو نصل أو حافر أو جناح. يعني جناح الطير. هذا يجوز. And he was adding that this is the word of the Prophet ﷺ. أعوذ بالله. So Mahdi gave him 10,000 dirhams. Mahdi, when he said this hadith, he gave him 10,000 dirhams. And then when he left, Mahdi told him, he said, أشهد أن قفاك قفا كذاب على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. He said, I bear witness that you are a liar that fabricates lies upon the Prophet. He said, and I am the cause of why you lied. I am the cause of that. And then he took all those birds and he slaughtered them, shirwaju rishankat, right? He slaughtered every single one of them because he was the cause. Meyakinimi kaftar bozima, enemy gunai ka mamekonam, or this thing that I had. It made you to say this. So he said, Innama istajlabtu dhalika ana. I was the cause of you doing that. So then Shaykh Abdul Fattah says that what was the reason why he gave him that 10,000. So they said that these two stories are connected with one another. The giving of 10,000 was in another incident, and it was mixed with this narration. Actually, in this Khalifa al-Mahdi, he just told him that, I was the cause of what you did, and just itiraman, he just let him go so that there's no any fitna or anything like that. But there was another incident that a person came with a sandal, and inside of with a cloth, and inside of that cloth was a sandal. So the person who came, he said, "Oh Khalifa, this is the sandal of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam." So the Khalifa, he took the sandal and he kissed it and he put it on his eyes, and then he gave this person 10,000 dirhams and he let him go. Then what did he say after the guy left? He said, when the person left and his jama'at left, he said, أَتَرَوْنَ أَنِّي لَمْ أَعْلَمْ أَنَّ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم لَمْ يَرَ النَّعْلَ هَذِهِ فَضْلًا أَنْ يَكُونَ لَبِسَهَا. He said, don't you guys know that I know that the Prophet ﷺ never wore these sandals, and never did he even see these sandals. Why did I kiss this and why did I give it to him? Is because the people that were with him and the public that were with him, they were convinced that this is the sandal of Rasulullah. And if I don't respect that, and if I don't have adab for that, they're going to consider me like, what type of kafir is this? He doesn't even honor the sanctities of this deen. So I gave him that, and I honored the sandal, right, to remove the harm from the ummah, that this is better for the Khalifa to have done that than for him to have created a fitna. So it just shows the wisdom, but it also shows like the culture that existed. That this is what this type of stuff that existed. And this was one of the, amongst some of the pious, you can say, Khalifas that existed. But there was many of them who completely, they didn't care, and they would actually encourage these type of things. Another chapter that is linked to this, Ad-Dassu fi Kutub al-Ruwat. From amongst fabrications is people adding things and altering the books of people. Well, they'll take a nuskha of a kitab and then they'll alter it and they'll add things, make additions to those books, which is called das. وَالدَّسُّ إِدْخَالُ شَيْءٍ فِي شَيْءٍ بِخَفَاءٍ وَاحْتِيَالٍ. It's, hiding something in something in a very conniving and a secretive way. Right? So they would take the books of hadith, some of the books of hadith, and they would add lies to it, or they would add narrations to it, and they would fabricate narrations to it. This also existed. وهذا الداء الوبيل وقع في من بعض المفسدين الضالين في بعض كتب المحدثين ومن بعدهم في بعض كتب الفقهاء. So this existed in some of the books of the muhaddithin and the books of the fuqaha. من غير هؤلاء وهؤلاء. فقد يتغفل بعض المفسدين بعض الشيوخ الكبار في السن الضعفاء في الذهن أو بالبصر. So some of the mashayikh, they became old in age and they became weak and they couldn't see properly, and they had very close connection with these scholars and these shuyukh. So the books back in the days, they were written by hand. And they wouldn't if you see this book now, you can go online and order this book and there's like 100 of them. So if I put something in this nuskha and I add it from my own, you just go to another nuskha and you see it's not there. But at that time, this wasn't easy. It wasn't known. People would memorize them and there would be one nuskha of a kitab, for example, and they would add something in it, or they would change it, or they would alter it. And then what would happen, right? They would think that this person has actually said those words. وَكَانَ هَذَا مُمْكِنًا فِي الزَّمَنِ الْقَدِيمِ. يوم كانت الكتب متداولة كلها مخطوطة تنسخ وتقتنى ويرحل بها إلى أقاصي البلاد. So these books were actually written by hand, and then they were passed down, and then maybe another copy would be written, and then these books would then spread throughout the world. فيسهل الدس فيها لعدم انتشارها بين طلبة العلم والعلماء. So it was very easy to alter these books and put things inside of them, because these books were not so widespread and circulated. You didn't have so many copies of one book. فإذا دس إنسان شيئا في كتاب فقل أن يعرف أنه مدسوس. So if somebody would have added something, it would be very difficult to know. وخاصة إذا كان الكتاب المدسوس فيه كله بخط واحد فلا يظن المدسوس إلا أنه من مؤلف الكتاب. And the worst type of das, or where they have these alterations, is if the whole book was actually written by the hand of the same alterer. Maybe if the whole book is written and then he changes one word, then you could see that it's a different khat. But if the whole thing was written by this hand and then things were added along, you would probably never know. And this is why these books that we have, Bukhari and Muslim and Tirmidhi and Ibn Majah and Abu Dawud, these books were in the life of the author, right? Many of them were, printed. People memorized them. They had many, many students, and there's a sanad that goes back, and so on and so forth. So this is another speciality of the books of Bukhari and Muslim and Tirmidhi. And they actually had students, and they had people that were very, very careful, watchful, right? They had specific nuskhas, and those nuskhas were then copied, and they were what you call mutadawil. They were circulated in a way that there was there was no possibility that somebody could now add something to it after. And if it was, then it would be known immediately, right? For example, like the Quran Kareem. Hundreds of people memorized it in one generation. Thousands of people memorized it in one generation. It could not be, even if somebody had added something to it, it would be known that that is not of it. Because if one nuskha said this, there was 100 other nuskhas that said completely opposite of that. So it was easy to recognize. So this is a very important point. وقد كان بعض الدساسين يغطي ما دسه بخط جديد على كتاب قديم بتتريبه وتعريضه للشمس والهواء ليتسق مع لون الخط القديم فيسري على الناظر والقارئ غير النبيه العارف بمثل هذا. So some of the techniques they had is that they would scratch out something, or they would add something, and then they would take dust and they would rub it on it so the ink wouldn't look fresh, and they would try to, how they make counterfeit money and stuff like that? They make the money kind of look old. So then they would take, after writing it, they would leave it in the sun for a very long time in the heat, and they would take dirt and they would rub it, and they kind of make it identical to the original one. So look, everybody who's listening to this, there was the, subhanAllah, Hadith police department that existed, the Hadith investigation department that existed from the beginning. They know about these things. They were aware of these things. They caught people doing this. They disqualified them. And then we're going to read some stories and ahwal of those people. I mean, I want something I'm trying to drive this point home. Haider, try to stay awake with me. I know it's hard. Here's some water. Haider, drink water. It's cold. It'll refreshen you, wake you back up. I think it's the carbon dioxide from the masks. You keep breathing that, and it's like sleeping gas, So everybody gets more sleepy. I know it's hard. So what I'm trying to drive home, this point, is we have to appreciate as an ummah how much care, how much investigation, how much scrutinization existed in this domain. It wasn't something that is whatever, everything just slipped through. This slipped through, that slipped through. This weak hadith, that da'if hadith. No, it didn't slip through. The fact that we have this word, da'if hadith, the fact that we have this word, da'if hadith, mawdu' hadith, sahih hadith, tells you there are people like hawks, watching every single thing and fully aware of what's being narrated. We have to appreciate that in Islam. Brothers and sisters and honorable listeners, nobody has this. No religion has this. Judaism or Christianity, nobody has this. What Islam has. The asanid and the scrutinization and the way that we are, like we have investigation department in this field, which, what we should be aware of is, to appreciate what the scholars in this ummah have done, how much effort they have put in this regard and how much work that they have done. So to just give some example, كان الجهابذة يكشفون هذا التزوير والدس في كتاب الراوي. They were great, brilliant scholars that would actually expose the ruwat. They would expose them for doing this type of corruptions. إذا كان ألحقه وأدخله فيه لغاية من الغايات عنده يذكرون في ترجمته نحو هذه العبارة لم يكن له سماع لهذا الكتاب. Ajib. So how would they critique a narrator? He said he had not heard this book from that scholar. So if a person did not hear that kitab from Imam Bukhari from beginning to end, they said, this narration of Bukhari, we do not accept it from this person. لم يكن له سماع لهذا الكتاب من المصنف. This person who is a narrator did not hear the entire book being read by the musannif. And that was a نوع من الضعف, right? لكنه ألحق نفسه في السماع بخط طري فكشف أمره وهجر حديثه. He actually wrote with his own writing, right, that he heard. It's like somebody who has a certificate, right? He writes a certificate with his own hand that I graduated from Harvard with crayons. One is in red and one is in blue and black, and right? Printed from the computer laptop. He just made up some certificate for himself. So with the scholars, they would know, and they would catch him on that, and then they said his hadith is not acceptable. We don't accept it. He's a liar, right? This is what you call fake credentials, making up fake credentials. وهذه واقعة في الدس وقعت من بعض الناس في بعض كتب الفقه. And this actually happened in one of the books of fiqh, as is mentioned. جاء في كشف الظنون عند ذكر مقدمة أبي الليث ما يلي شرحها الشيخ مصلح الدين مصطفى ابن زكريا ابن آي الطوغمش القرماني سماه التوضيح. ذكر الشعراني أنه شرح عظيم دخل به مؤلفه إلى مصر. So there was a muallif, Shaykh Muslihuddin. He wrote a book called the Tawdih. When he came with this book to Egypt in the year 809 Hijri, فرآه بعض الحسدة, when some of the jealous people saw a wonderful book that he wrote, فدس له بعض كلام فيه قدح في مقام سيد الخليل عليه السلام. So what they did is that in some of the places they put a disrespectful words for Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. They added it in his book. So what happened is فأفتوا بكفره وقتله فخرج هاربا. So when they read those sections, they said, who is the author of this book? They said so and so. They said, okay, they gave fatwa of his kufr, and they said that this person has to be put to death and executed for his heretical beliefs. And what was the statement, Hafsab, that was in there? وَذَلِكَ كَقَوْلِهِ فِي بَابِ الْأَحْدَاثِ يَسْتَقْبِلُ الشَّمْسَ وَالْقَمَرِ وَلَا يَسْتَدْبِرُهُمَا. That when you're urinating or when you're using the bathroom, then you shouldn't face the moon and you shouldn't face the sun or put your back to the moon or the sun. Rather, you should face sideways. Understand? Why? Because Ibrahim alayhi salam used to worship the sun and the moon. So in the books of fiqh, this is a valid qawl, that when you urinate, from the adab, you should not face the qibla, and you shouldn't put your back to the qibla. And you shouldn't face the sun, and you shouldn't face the moon or put your back to the sun or the moon. Why? Because inna shamsa wal qamara ayatani min ayatillah. The sun and the moon are two signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالشَّمْسَ وَالْقَمَرَ آيَتَيْنِ جعلنا الشمس والقمر آيتين فمحونا آية الليل. Right? So the night and the day Allah Ta'ala made us His signs. It's in the Quran. So you don't urinate facing, right, this makhluk, this sign, this creation of Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? That's understood. But what they put in there, you should not face the sun and the moon, and neither should you put your back to the sun and the moon when you're urinating. It's a book of fiqh, so it's mentioning adab. Because Ibrahim alayhi salam used to worship the sun and the moon, they just added that point to it. When people read that, they said, who wrote this book? Oh, Shaykh Muslihuddin wrote the book. Oh, go get Shaykh Muslihuddin. He ran away. They gave fatwa that. So this was some of the things that happened to scholars. Jealous people would add things to their kitabs, and it would become a cause of them getting a fatwa, and then they had to go to court and prove it's not theirs, and so on and so forth. So it became a very serious issue. وإليك فئة ممن عرف بدس الأخبار من كتب الرواة ودفاترهم. Some of them are, people who added and corrupted the books. From amongst them, في ترجمة قيس بن الربيع الأسدي الكوفي الأحول. One of the narrators was Qais ibn Rabi'. Ibn Hibban says about him, صبرت أحاديث قيس وتتبعتها فرأيته صدوقا مأمونا حين كان شابا. Ibn Hibban says, I looked at all the hadiths of Qais ibn Rabi' and I investigated his hadiths. And all the hadith that he narrated when he was young, you can take from him. فَلَمَّا كَبِرَ سَاءَ حِفْظُهُ. When he became old, his memory became weak. وَامْتُحِنَ بِإِبْنٍ سُوءٍ. And he had a very, very bad son. Allah had given him a son who used to act like a khadim, and he was a very bad person. And he was a khadim. He used to take care of his father. فَكَانَ يُدْخِلُ عَلَيْهِ الْحَدِيثِ. So when he would ask his son, Bache mamu hadith shista to kitaba bibi, oh my son, what's that hadith? Can you check the book? He would tell him some fake narration. He would just make it up. He was known to be an evil person. أُمْتُحِنَ بِإِبْنٍ سُوءٍ. Allah mahfazna min hadhihi al-fitan. So these are things that happen in history. Sometimes when we hear the story, we think, oh, maybe every one of them became like this. This was something very common. It was not something common, but it existed. And that is why these narrators, some of them were not reliable. It's good to hear this stuff. I like to have a class like this, so all of you hear some of the things that we studied when we were, doing the Alim program. People think that we learn how to, do Salatul Janaza and do Jummah prayer and how to give speeches and so on and so forth. No, you read a lot of things like this to understand the qawaid and usul. A person can become an imam in a year. In 1 year, not even a year, hafiz up, maybe 4 months, imam course. You could do imam course in 4 months. I make an imam out of any one of you. You just have to practice your Quran a little bit, learn how to give a little spicy speech, right? And not mentioning the fabricated narrations. And you're a wonderful imam. To become actually a scholar, there's a lot of things in the history of Islam. It's amazing stuff. Astounding things. So he was tested by a very, impious and unrighteous son. And يدخل عليه الحديث فوقع في أخباره مناكير. He would interpolate certain things in the hadith, and that's why many hadith of this Shaykh Qais ibn Rabi', many of his narrations near the end of his life, they had munkar. They were unreliable hadiths. But Hafiz Sahib, you see, who would narrate from him? Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah. We know that Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, they're reliable narrators. They're reliable books. So now the question is, why did they narrate from him? Is because these scholars knew which are the hadith that were reliable, that he narrated when he was young, and which hadith of his are the ones that are not reliable. So this is also the job of the muhaddith. So if we find a muhaddith that's narrating hadith from some of these narrators, we should not be shocked, because they knew which of their narrations are reliable and which of them are not. قال أبو داود ضعيف. Abu Dawud said about him, he's weak. أودع كتبه عند غياث بن إبراهيم فأفسدها عليه. He left his books with Ghiyath ibn Ibrahim, and Ghiyath ibn Ibrahim corrupted his books. So notice that he himself was a reliable narrator. But the person for who was taking care of his books, he was not reliable. And that was how his knowledge became corrupted and it became wasted. وجاء في تهذيب التهذيب أيضا في ترجمة محمد بن يونس الجمال البغدادي روي عنه وروى عنه محمد بن الجهم وقال كان عندي متهما قالوا له ابن يدخل عليه هذه الأحاديث وقال ابن عدي هو ممن يسرق حديث الناس. So another narrator, Muhammad ibn Yunus, he would mix other narrations, or his son would mix narrations with that narration and he would mess things up. وجاء في كتاب المجروحين لابن حبان في ترجمة سفيان بن وكيع بن الجراح كان شيخا فاضلا صدوقا إلا أنه ابتلي بوراق سوء. Look at this bechara, Hafsa. Make dua for good students. Make dua that Allah gives good students and good khuddam. You know why? Khuddam mess things up. So this Shaykh Sufyan ibn Waki, he was Sufyan ibn Waki ibn Jarrah, so the son of Waki ibn Jarrah. He says, كان شيخا فاضلا صدوقا. He was a very, very knowledgeable Shaykh, very righteous, truthful. But the person who would write for him, his katib, he was a bad guy. He was a naughty and very, very naughty guy. كان يدخل عليه الحديث. He would corrupt the hadith that he would write. When he would write a hadith, he would change it. Shaitan. وكان يثق به فيجيب فيما يقرأ عليه. And he used to rely upon him. And he wouldn't question like, oh, chira nashtakadi. He wouldn't see it. He didn't give a second look. He wouldn't give it a second glance. So it's important that the people that are close, Hafizab, even the people that we keep close to us, when you are dealing with ilm, when you are dealing with editing, Hafizab, mashallah, is an editor and our typesetter for Noor Publications. Many of the books, Hafizab does it. So we know that how many times we go over a single book? 10 times. One of these books, that book Sacrifice, the life of the Prophet ﷺ, that book I think we went over how many times, Hafizab? 12 times. We went over 12 times. And the final print that we give this edition, still we found mistake. Such a painstaking effort. Painstaking. So imagine if I just write a book and I say, Hafizab, you do it, and we don't even look at it again. So many things I wrote, and I made mistakes. So many things he made a mistake, and then we would give it to Dr. Saab, and Dr. Saab looked at it and found both our mistake. It passed, because you try to read it, your eye is writing it, so you need someone else's eye to read it over again. So when you're actually in the effort of knowledge, you can't be so relying on one person. You have to do these edits. So this is a ajib thing, Afsab, that we find here. وَكَانَ يَثِقُ بِهِ فَيُجِيبُ فِيمَا يَقْرَأُ عَلَيْهِ يعني يقره. He would, whatever it would be written, he would say, yeah, that's correct. وقيل له بعد ذلك في أشياء منها فلم يرجع. And then when he would be asked about it after, Shaykh, you wrote this doesn't seem right. He said, no, it's right. فمن أجل إصراره على الخطأ استحق الترك. And because that Shaykh, he would persist upon that khata. When people would catch him that, no, Shaykh, this is a mistake, he would say, no, it's correct. It's not a mistake in my book, it's your mistake. And he would get emotional, so the muhaddithin left his hadith. Otherwise, he was a pious and righteous Shaykh. But because he did not do revision, he would not edit, and then whatever wrong that was mistakenly kept in the book, he would not change that, even though he would be corrected. And because of that, then the muhaddithin said that he is not reliable. And they left his hadith forever, even though he was a pious and righteous person. But after that, they didn't accept his work. وَنُمَاذِجُ ذَلِكَ تُكْثِرُ فِي كُتُبِ الرِّجَالِ وَالضُّعَفَاءِ وَالْمَجْرُوحِينَ. And examples of this from the narrators that are weak narrators, or narrators that are matrukin, abandoned narrators, criticized narrators. There's many of them like this, where they would not look again, or they would have some certain writers, or they would rely upon corrupted texts and so on. And this is exactly what happened to the Bible. All this stuff that we're talking about, this is exactly what took place in the Bible. Anybody new that came, he added something. One person did it, he added that as well. The one person would write it, oh, he's a great sheikh, we don't even ask about what he wrote. And the Bible became like a plaything, a toy for everybody. And everybody's hand that book went, everybody added something of their own. Added another word, added another thing, and the Bible is as you see it today. Right? Everybody adding in every generation whatever they want, or taking out what they want. But look at, we're not even speaking about Quran Kareem. Quran is mahfuz. We're talking about now Hadith. In our Hadith, we have so much scrutinization and investigation in Hadith. Now you can imagine how much preservation we have in the Quran itself. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us a tawfiq to understand this and appreciate it. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.